All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at something a lot of you have been asking about, lesson and unit planning.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it can feel pretty overwhelming, right? Designing engaging lessons, picking the right materials, making it all flow together.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts for sure.
Exactly. Well, lucky for us, we've got this awesome source material that breaks it all down. It's like having a super experienced language teacher right here in the room with us, sharing all their best tips.
I love that, like a mentor in a book.
Right. And you know what really grabbed my attention? How this expert breaks down a simple language activity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like you might think it's just, okay, do this, then do that. But it's actually way more nuanced than that. There's a lot going on beneath the surface.
It's like an iceberg. You only see the tip, the activity itself, but there's this whole hidden mass influencing how it actually works in the classroom.
Exactly. And our source goes deep, listing out all these factors that we need to consider. Some are obvious, like what's the name of the activity? What skills does it target?
Right.
But then there are things you might not think about right away.
Like what?
Like, how is the room set up? How much prep time do you need beforehand? It made me realize I've been kind of planning on autopilot sometimes.
I think we all do that from time to time.
Yeah. We forget about all these little levers we can pull to change the whole learning experience.
And that's the real magic, right? That you can tweak each element of an activity to create something completely different.
I love that. It's like remixing a song. You've got the same basic melody, but you can change the tempo, the instruments, you can change the whole vibe.
That's a great analogy. And the source is packed with examples of how to do that.
Right. So let's jump into some specifics. There's this one activity, the alphabet blackboard game, that I thought I knew inside and out.
Classic game.
Yeah. Teams at the board, the teacher calls out a letter, everyone scrambles to write down words in different categories.
Cities, foods, verbs, you name it.
Yeah. But the source totally flipped my script on this one. They showed how you can take that same basic structure and morph it to fit different needs.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Like, what if you have a tiny class?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
ditch the teams, everyone just plays solo. Or what if your students get super stressed by timed activities?
Oh, yeah, good point.
You slow it down. Make it about creative answers instead of just speed.
I was also fascinated by how you can use the same game, but change the goal completely.
Right.
Like, want to review vocabulary? Boom, alphabet blackboard game. Need a low-key way to assess their understanding? There it is again.
It's like a Swiss Army knife of activities.
Oh,
But that's just one example, right?
yeah.
Let's talk about another one that blew my mind. This one's called dictation with a twist.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the twist?
Well, instead of the teacher being the one reading out the text, they become a robot.
A robot.
Yeah, a robot.
Uh-huh.
Controlled by the students.
Wow, that's a fun image. So the students have to tell the teacher what to do.
Exactly. It's the students who have to say things like, hold on, robot teacher, or could you repeat that last bit?
I love that. It completely flips the script.
And it forces them to use the language actively. They're not just passively writing down what they hear, they're thinking about what they need to say, forming questions and instructions in real time.
It's like sneaking in a ton of speaking practice without them even realizing it.
Exactly. And thinking back to what you, dear listener, told us about your teaching goals. You mentioned wanting to get your students to speak up more in class, Graf.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Well, this could be a game changer.
I like it. What I also like is how it empowers the students. They're not just taking dictation, they're directing the flow of the activity. And that shift in agency can do wonders for their confidence and motivation.
Oh, totally. And you know me, I love those simple activities that you can tweak in a million ways. This source also had some cool ideas for repeating after the teacher, which, let's be honest, can get pretty dull if you're not careful.
Yeah, it can be a bit robotic itself sometimes.
Right. But it doesn't have to be. The source suggests all sorts of variations, like having students close their eyes to focus on the pronunciation, or having them choose their favorite phrases to repeat.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, and I love the idea of playing with volume, pitch, and emotion. It's like turning it into a mini performance instead of just parroting back words.
That ties back to another big point in the source, which is thinking about which cognitive processes each activity is tapping into.
Right, it's not just about repeating mindlessly.
Exactly. With the repeating after the teacher variations, you're engaging not just memory, but also auditory processing, creative expression, maybe even a bit of emotional intelligence.
Okay, I've got one more example I want to share from this section because it really hit home for me. It's about how to transform copying from the blackboard.
Ooh, another classic that can feel a bit passive sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. But imagine this. Instead of full sentences on the board, it's individual words or phrases all jumbled up.
Like a puzzle.
Yeah. And them students have to unscramble them to make sentences.
So they're not just practicing handwriting, they're actually analyzing the language, figuring out word order and grammar rules to make it all fit together.
Exactly. Which leads to a much deeper understanding than just copying something verbatim.
And it ties back to this theme of autonomy that the source really emphasizes.
Right.
Instead of just being told what's correct, students get to experiment and make their own discoveries about how the language works.
They become little detectives.
I love that.
Okay, so we've thrown a lot of examples your way, listener, but I think you're starting to see the pattern here.
Yeah.
It's about moving away from that one-size-fits-all mentality.
And realizing that every activity is really a toolbox waiting to be opened.
Yes. And you have all these tools at your disposal, and you could choose which ones to use and how to use them to create the perfect learning experience for your students.
So it's not about throwing out the classics, it's about reimagining them.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to keep exploring in part 2. We'll be diving into even more creative variations on those familiar activities and talking about practical strategies for making them work in your classroom. So stay tuned.
The deep dive continues. Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready for more activity makeovers.
Oh, absolutely. I'm still buzzing from all the possibilities we uncovered in the last part. It's like my teacher brain just got a supercharge.
That's the spirit. Okay, so let's take another activity that's often seen as a bit dry, shall we? And see if we can inject some life into it. How about reading a text and then answering questions on it?
Oh yeah, that one. I can practically hear the pencil scratching and the yawns echoing through the classroom. Not exactly the most thrilling activity.
But hold on. Our source suggests some really neat ways to shake things up. One idea is to ditch the whole teacher-led vocabulary pre-teaching. Let the students discover new words on their own.
Interesting. So instead of me explaining every tricky word beforehand,
They're using dictionaries, context clues. They can even ask each other for help.
it turns the whole reading process into an active treasure hunt for meaning.
Exactly. And think about all those cognitive skills they're building. Problem solving, deduction, collaboration.
Plus, they're actually using the dictionary, which is a skill that will serve them well beyond the classroom walls. You know, I'm picturing you, listener, watching your students become more independent learners, confidently tackling those unfamiliar texts.
And that feeling of accomplishment when they figure out a word on their own, priceless.
Absolutely. Okay, what else? What other twists does the source suggest?
Okay, here's another one that really caught my eye. It's about reading the same text multiple times, but through different lenses.
Okay, my curiosity is piqued. Tell me more about these lenses.
So imagine this. You ask students to read a text once from their own perspective.
Right.
Then they read it again, but this time from the point of view of a character in the story.
Ooh, interesting. Like a parent or a best friend.
Exactly. Or even their pet.
That's such a cool way to get them thinking critically about character relationships and motivations. It's like they're stepping into different shoes and experiencing the story from multiple angles.
And it injects a dose of empathy and creativity into what could be, as you said, a pretty straightforward comprehension exercise.
They're not just understanding the text, they're interpreting it, bringing their own imagination and perspectives to the table.
Right. And, this could really resonate with those students who love to role play or who are drawn to exploring different points of view. It's like you're adding a whole new dimension to the story.
Totally. It's taking comprehension to a whole new level. So let's talk about those comprehension questions themselves. How can we make those more engaging?
Well, the source suggests moving beyond those basic who, what, when type questions, the ones that just test for surface level understanding.
Right.
And instead, crafting a more diverse range of questions that really gets students thinking.
So we're talking about why questions, what if questions. Questions that connect the text to their own lives and experiences.
Exactly. You could ask them to analyze a character's actions, predict what might happen next, or even debate the moral implications of the story.
It's about making those connections, right? Connecting the text to their own lives, to the world around them.
Absolutely. And here's a radical idea. What if we let the students choose which questions they want to answer?
Whoa, really? Give them that much control?
Yes. Present them with a menu of questions.
Okay.
Ranging from those basic comprehension ones to the deeper analysis ones.
I see.
And let them select the ones that pique their interest or challenge them the most.
I love that. It not only keeps them engaged, but it also caters to all those different learning styles and preferences.
Right. Some students might gravitate towards those factual questions, while others might jump at the chance to really analyze and debate.
And it gives them that sense of ownership over their learning, which we all know can be incredibly motivating. They're not just answering questions, they're curating their own learning experience.
I like that. Curating their own learning experience. That's a great way to put it. All right, so we've tackled reading comprehension. What about another activity that often gets a bad rap? Role playing.
Ah, yes, role-playing. I can already hear the groans.
Right. It can sometimes feel a bit forced or awkward, especially if the students aren't prepared or feel put on the spot.
Yeah, totally. It's like suddenly they have to become actors, and not everyone is comfortable with that.
Exactly. But before we dismiss role playing entirely, let's see what our expert has to say.
Okay, good point. Always good to hear from the expert.
So, their first piece of advice is to ground the role play in real life scenarios, situations that students can actually relate to.
So instead of those generic ordering food at a restaurant scenarios.
We're giving them something more authentic, more engaging.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, think about situations they might actually encounter in their own lives. Dealing with conflict, making difficult decisions, navigating social dynamics.
Like how to respectfully disagree with someone, or how to stand up for themselves in a challenging situation.
Precisely. And remember, listener, you mentioned having a diverse group of students with different cultural backgrounds.
Oh.
Role-playing can be a fantastic way to explore those different cultural perspectives and norms.
That's a fantastic point. It can help build empathy and understanding, which is so important in today's world. I think the key to making role-playing work is preparation, though.
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes that.
Giving students ample time to brainstorm, rehearse, build their confidence, before they actually perform the role play.
It's about setting them up for success.
Exactly. So we're not just throwing them into the deep end.
Nope.
We're working with them to develop a storyline, identify key characters, maybe even practice some key phrases.
And maybe even provide them with sentence starters, vocabulary lists, or visual aids, just to support that language production.
And once they've had a chance to rehearse, you could even have them switch roles so they get to experience the situation from different perspectives.
Oh, that's a great idea. It not only deepens their understanding of the characters and the situation, but it also helps them practice using the language in different ways.
I'm starting to see role-playing in a new light. It's not just about putting on a show.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It's about creating a safe space for students to experiment with the language, build confidence, and explore different perspectives. Okay, I'm sold. What's next?
Well, speaking of powerful tools, let's not forget about one that often evokes a lot of fear and dread in the language classroom.
Uh-oh. Which one is that?
Memorization.
Ah, yes, the dreaded memorization. But we can't really avoid it, can we?
Not entirely, but it can be made more palatable, dare I say even, enjoyable.
Okay, you've got my attention. How do we transform memorization from a chore into something, well, less painful?
Our expert suggests harnessing the power of teamwork and a little friendly competition.
Interesting. So we're ditching the solitary flashcard drills and embracing a more collaborative approach.
Exactly. Divide the students into groups, mixed ability groups ideally,
Okay.
and have them work together to memorize whatever the target language is. Vocabulary, grammar rules, dialogue lines, whatever you're focusing on.
And then we test them as a group.
Yes, but with a twist. So instead of simply adding up individual scores, you calculate an average group score. So everyone in the group gets the same score, regardless of their individual performance.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
It creates a powerful incentive for students to support each other and to make sure everyone in the group understands the material.
Exactly. It fosters a sense of shared responsibility for learning, encourages those who are more advanced to help those who might be struggling.
And it taps into that human desire for connection and belonging. It's not just about memorizing words. It's about working together towards a common goal.
And let's be honest, a little healthy competition never hurt anyone. It can be a really fun and motivating way to inject some energy into what might otherwise be a pretty dry memorization exercise.
Okay, I'm really loving these creative twists on classic activities.
Me too. I feel like we're rediscovering the magic of teaching.
Right, but I'm also aware that not every classroom is the same. We've got different learners, different resources, different teaching contexts to consider.
That's an excellent point. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in part 3 of our deep dive. We'll talk about how to adapt these activities to fit all those different variables.
Different learning styles, different teaching contexts. It can feel overwhelming, but I'm excited to hear what our expert has to say.
Me too. It's all about finding those creative solutions. So stay tuned, folks, because the deep dive isn't over yet. We've got more insights and practical strategies coming your way.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite the journey exploring all these ways to revamp our favorite language activities,
Yeah.
but now it's time to get real.
Time to get practical.
Yes. How do we actually make these ideas work in our own classrooms? With our own unique groups of students? Because a classroom isn't a cookie-cutter environment.
Right. Every group is different. Every student is different.
Exactly. We've got different learning styles, different resources, different dynamics at play. So let's talk about adapting these activities.
Yeah, let's get specific.
Where do we even begin?
Well, it all starts with knowing your students.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's more than just knowing their names.
Oh, absolutely. It's about understanding how they learn, what motivates them, what challenges them.
So paying attention to who thrives in group work versus those who prefer to work alone.
Yeah, for example.
Noticing which students jump at the chance to speak up and which ones are a bit more hesitant.
Exactly. It's also about tuning into their learning preferences. Are they visual learners,
Oh.
auditory learners, kinesthetic learners?
Oh, right, the different learning styles.
Okay.
Some need to see it, some need to hear it, some need to move around and experience it.
It's like having a garden with different types of plants.
I like that.
You wouldn't water a cactus the same way you'd water a fern. Each one needs a slightly different approach to thrive.
So true. Okay, so we've observed our students. We've got a sense of their learning preferences. What's next? How do we actually adapt the activities?
Well, let's go back to that alphabet-like board game we talked about earlier. Imagine you have a class that's super competitive, like to the point where it gets a bit too intense.
Yeah, I've definitely been there.
Instead of focusing on which team finishes first, you could change the rules to emphasize collaboration.
Interesting.
Maybe they get bonus points for coming up with unique words that no other team has thought of,
Okay.
or for working together to create a story or a poem using their words.
I love that. It's taking that competitive energy and channeling it into something more creative and collaborative.
Exactly.
And what about those students who are a bit more introverted or who get a bit overwhelmed by those fast-paced activities?
You might ditch the teams altogether, have them play individually, or give them more time to brainstorm before they start writing.
Give them a chance to process.
Yeah. You could even provide them with word banks or sentence starters just to help them get going.
It's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Where students feel challenged but not overwhelmed.
Exactly. And these same principles apply to any activity, really. Let's take that dictation with a twist where the students are controlling the teacher robot.
Oh, yeah. That one is so fun.
Right. But for some students, that might feel a bit too intimidating.
Yeah, putting them on the spot like that.
Yeah.
Especially if they're still building their speaking confidence.
So you could offer them sentence starters or visual aids to help them formulate their instructions.
Or they could work in pairs or small groups to brainstorm the language they need.
And if you have students who are really tech-savvy, you could even incorporate technology into the activity. Maybe they record the dictation on their phones and then use a speech-to-text app to check their work.
Oh, that's a great idea. It's giving them that instant feedback, and it's engaging those tech-savvy learners. But what about those times when we don't have access to fancy technology?
Or even a traditional classroom setup, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's where creativity really comes in, because you don't need a lot of bells and whistles to create a good learning experience. Sometimes, the simplest materials are the most effective.
So thinking outside the box, repurposing everyday objects.
Exactly. Magazine pictures for vocab building, newspaper articles for discussions. You could even use things like menus or maps to create those real-world scenarios.
And don't forget about movement.
Yes.
Getting students up and out of their seats can do wonders for their energy and engagement.
Especially for those kinesthetic learners.
Right. So think about incorporating games, role plays, or even just simple activities that involve moving around the classroom.
Or even taking the learning outside the classroom altogether.
A field trip.
A field trip, a visit to a museum. These can all be amazing learning experiences.
It's not just about adapting activities to different learning styles, is it? It's about being flexible, being responsive to our teaching context, to the world around us.
Exactly. And I think the most effective teachers are the ones who are constantly adapting, experimenting, finding creative solutions to those everyday challenges.
And they're not afraid to let their students have a say.
That's so important. When students feel like their voices are heard and their interests are valued, they're just so much more engaged and motivated.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key message we want to leave our listeners with?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think it's this. There's no one right way to teach language.
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Nope. What works in one classroom might not work in another. It's about finding what works for you, for your students, for your unique teaching context.
And it's about being willing to step outside your comfort zone, try new things, embrace the messy, beautiful process of teaching.
And learning. Don't forget about learning. We're all learning together.
So true. And, it's supposed to be fun, too.
Absolutely. If you're not having fun, your students probably aren't either.
To our listener, we hope you found this deep dive helpful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Remember, you're the expert in your classroom. Trust your instincts, get to know your students, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Have fun out there.
That's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that's relevant and meaningful to you. Until then, happy teaching.